Hey everybody, it's Melissa with Build a Better Bakery, and I want to make your baking business better in the next 5 minutes or less. Today we're talking about sourdough bread for beginners, and we're covering the concept of baking sourdough with a few extra tips for you. Remember that baking sourdough has a lot to do with steaming the dough in the first few minutes to create that iconic crust. I'll be covering baking in a Dutch oven or a covered pan for these tips. You may or may not be scoring the dough before baking with a lathe, and that's personal preference. Number one, when baking. These are my timelines in a Dutch oven. Add cookie sheet on the second level of the oven to radiate heat and lessen bottom burn. Preheat to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Put the silicone sling or parchment, but I prefer the sling, and the bread dough into a cold Dutch oven and bake with the lid on for 30 minutes. Drop to 400 degrees, remove the lid, bake for an additional 15 to 25 minutes based on how dark you want it to be. Cool for 1 hour before slicing. Number two, when baking in a clamshell bread pan situation, you're going to add your cookie sheet on the second level of the oven to radiate the heat and lessen the bottom burn. Preheat to 450 degrees Fahrenheit and add parchment strips around the bread and the bread into the cold bread pan. You don't have to preheat it. Top with the second same bread pan to catch the steam. Bake for 30 minutes, drop to 400 degrees and remove the top pan. Bake for 15 minutes. Additionally, with these pans, you're going to remove the loaf from the bottom pan, remove the parchment, and do an open bake for about 15 minutes to brown the whole loaf. Number three, baking sourdough can be attempted with other products and setups, including open baking on a pan or a stone and with trays of water. There are other contraptions that you can bake inside as well. Likely, the open bake will cause a darker loaf and sometimes a more burnt loaf than something with a closed top on it. I personally do not like open baking, but I know some people do. Number four, do you have to preheat the Dutch pan or the Dutch oven or the pan? No, I've not seen any difference, and you'll burn yourself less if you don't preheat it. Number five, do you have to add cornmeal, rice, etc. to the bottom of the Dutch oven to stop burning on the bottom? Maybe, but those products are going to burn and smell too while you're baking it. I like the cookie sheet on the bottom rack of the oven and then using a silicone sling to help with burning, but a bit of a dark color on the bottom of sourdough is perfectly normal. Number six, if you are having issues with flat loaves, I get a lot of questions about this. It could be due to other things like a weak starter, that's the number one cause, too much water in your dough, that's the number two cause, or poor shaping technique, that's the number three that I've seen in my classes. You can attempt to use a Dutch oven or a pan that touches all the sides of the dough. So not something that's so big, the dough's just in there, but it's not touching the sides. You can use a smaller version so that it holds the shape and bakes up for maybe like a higher hydration dough. And that could lead to more brown sides, but it's going to give you a better overall shape. Number seven, if you're having issues with burning, check the inside temperature of your oven with an actual oven thermometer, not just what the oven is saying. Get a separate thermometer. You may need to set your oven lower. Sometimes it runs hot. Okay. Baking sourdough can be really fun, but it also is the point where you can tell if something went wrong along the way. Always check to make sure your starter is active, as in it will double in size after a feed. If you're not there yet, it's not ready and it's not worth it for you to bake because it won't work out the way you want. Make sure you aren't using too much liquid for the amount of flour in the recipe. There are a lot of high hydration recipes out there, but they're really not for beginners. So I'll give you a basic recipe in just a second. And then you want to make sure the temperature of your home environment is working well with the amount of starter you're using in your recipe. If your house is really, really hot, you're going to use less starter. If your house is really cold, you're going to use more starter. A basic recipe is 350 grams filtered water, 12 grams kosher salt, 100 grams liquid starter, and 500 grams bread flour. That's like the super, super basic formula. As you add more water, the bread will get chewier, but it will also get flatter. So if you're having a flat loaf, that could be the problem. That's all for today's session on the baking of sourdough. Drop a comment or DM me if you have more questions. I hope you all have the best day.